May the 4th be with you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Center Stage.
It's May 4th, which Phil informed me on what this means.
It's National Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you.
Of course.
It's time to celebrate all things Star Wars. A long time ago, in a podcasting studio far, far away from the Capitol Square.
There's a lot of technology in Star Wars.
Well, droids. I mean, there's artificial intelligence in Star Wars. There are droids with personalities that go all across. That can fly They can fly spaceships, and they can even tell jokes.
Okay, but do they have any driverless cars in Star Wars?
There are times when the spaceships are driven by the droids. So I don't know if that's driverless or not.
Okay. Well, today on
Is
Center
R2-D2
Stage,
a person?
I would consider R2-D2 a person based on his artificial intelligence personality.
So he can donate as much as he wants to political campaigns?
Yes. Well, corporations are people too.
That's right. That's right.
Today on Center Stage, the Wisconsin State Journal's political podcast from the center of Wisconsin politics, we're going to talk about driverless cars. First of all, Phil, I want to do a quick quiz. Whenever you do a cartoon and I don't get the pop culture reference, you always kind of make fun at me for being an old fuddy-duddy who's out of it.
You are an old fuddy-duddy who's out of it.
True, but, you make fun of me, so now I'm going to try to turn this...
Is there this thing called Star Wars? I don't understand.
I'm going to try to turn this back on you a bit.
Okay.
With a reference. I'm going to quiz you on this, and it relates to today's podcast. What does KIT stand for?
Oh, that's the Knight Rider car, right?
You're right. Yeah, it actually stands for, I had to look it up, I have to admit, Knight Industries 2000.
Ooh, that's kind of fun.
It does kind of imply, since that was a TV show, Knight Rider, where the David Hasselhoff, who was so cool in the 80s and then became so lame, I think, around the 90s, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
He's very popular in Germany.
David Hasselhoff, of course, was the crime-fighting guy with the talking, self-driving car that ran on artificial intelligence. That was in the 80s, and I think because they called it the Knight Industry 2000, they must have thought that around 2000, that's the future.
That's right, 2000.
And we'll have driverless cars then.
18 years ago was the future.
Well, 18 years further than 2000, we did have this week a driverless shuttle down on the UW-Madison campus, giving some free rides to curious students. However, it wasn't really Knight Rider. Knight Rider had the ability to go into super pursuit mode. And this shuttle down on campus was maxing out at about 10 miles an hour.
That's not super pursuity.
No. It wasn't pursuing anyone. It was basically just going around the block. But I think it was still cool. We wrote an editorial off of that this week, and I think we're both pretty excited about driverless cars, even though the public generally is not all that confident about them.
No. There's a lot of, I think, legitimate concerns about what happens when robots start driving cars.
So UW-Madison is one of 10 sites across the country that is studying driverless autonomous cars. And these cars, do you want to talk about these cars a little bit?
Well, I know they use what's called LiDAR, I think, to find out, to sort of, it's a similar to a radar system. It can judge objects, and it has all sorts of backup sensors that can tell when it's close to an object and when to turn. It's taking in data from the environment around it and then making smart decisions about whether to go or stop or turn.
Right, and in the case of the shuttle on the UW campus, it had this high-definition map of the whole terrain. To some degree, we're already using some of this technology. Like my folks have a car where when you're backing out, there's a camera on the back, and it shows the range behind you. And if, for example, you get too close when you're backing up to a car or a bike or, God forbid, a baby carriage, it will start beeping. And if you still keep going, the brakes will come on and stop you from hitting it.
Very cool.
So the car comes in and takes over at that point.
Yeah.
So to some degree, this is already loaded in cars, but the person is still in charge.
Yeah.
The shuttle on campus was actually going around a block by itself using all of this technology we talked about, and it stopped at the signs. It didn't hit anybody, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately these smart vehicles that drive themselves are going to be way safer than you and I driving a car.
Well, that's the thing about humans. We are really bad at driving vehicles. Just as a species, we get distracted. Sometimes people are drunk, and they are very bad drivers when you're intoxicated. Robots don't get drunk. Robots don't stop and look at their cell phone. And robots don't get distracted by screaming kids in the back of their car.
You can relate to that, huh?
I can relate to that, yeah. Or like when your kid throws up in the back of your car. Robots don't notice or care about that.
Wisconsin is especially bad, too, at drunken driving, at binge drinking. So imagine if you had a car where the drunk can go to the car and say, drive me home, or hit a button and it drives them home. Imagine the lives that would be saved. Imagine if you have a driver who is a chronic speeder, and then you program the car that says it can't go faster than this speed.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea.
And we contrasted the shuttle down on campus giving driverless rides to students and curious passersby this week with a terrible accident that happened on the west side.
Where somebody was going like 102 miles per hour.
Crazy, yeah, in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. A couple was hit, and the man who's about 70 years old died, and his wife is in terrible condition in the hospital.
So there are how many traffic accidents are there every year in Wisconsin related to distracted driving or drunken driving?
So there were 11,300 injuries and 103 deaths related to inattentive driving in Wisconsin in 2016. And that increased by 6% for the number of injuries and 10% for the number of deaths.
Yeah.
That was up that much in 1 year. So that's an increasing problem. That's a little bit different than drunken driving, where we've been slowly bringing down, ever so slowly.
We were starting from a very high place on that statistic.
We were. And in drunken driving crashes in Wisconsin, for example, in 2016, 5,000 some alcohol-related crashes that caused almost 3,000 injuries and 143 deaths.
But it looks, I mean, it's as much as drunken driving is a serious issue in this state, people being distracted while they're driving is a bigger issue.
Speeding caused 8,200 injuries and 186 deaths. So distracted driving is actually causing the most injuries, not the most deaths.
But and I think probably the biggest solution to distracted driving is some sort of automated vehicle. You know, the driverless cars do not get distracted. Now, I guess the biggest issue with driverless cars is what happens when they make a mistake. You know, and there was a woman who was killed recently in Tempe, Arizona, by a Uber vehicle that was being driven automatically at the time. There was a driver in the vehicle, but she wasn't paying attention, and she didn't have her hands on the wheel. What happens when somebody is killed by a driverless vehicle? I guess that's kind of the big question.
Arizona, they wanted to be the place where driverless cars would really take off, and so they were allowing Uber and some other companies and researchers to test them out on the road. And when this driverless car hit this woman with the bike, the governor, and this was a couple of months ago, immediately suspended the operation of these vehicles and their testing in the state. Now that doesn't mean that he's not going to allow it in the future. The crash is being investigated. You and I watched the videos that the New York Times put up. I'm not so sure the car is at fault here, but we'll have to see. This person was crossing at night, multi-lane road in the dark, and didn't appear to be crossing in a crosswalk, and really came up quick when you're looking at the video. It does
seem like comes out of the middle of nowhere.
And there was a driver, as you said, in there as a backup, and he didn't see it either.
Yeah, the driver didn't see it, and the driver could have just as easily been looking at a cell phone at that moment and hit the person too.
Yes, and the other thing, that's the thing, is how many accidents were caused in Arizona that day by humans?
Yeah,
lots, every day.
But there are many fewer driverless cars on the road too.
That's true. Wisconsin's approach to this has been, Governor Scott Walker last year, he did an executive order to allow some testing, and also he created essentially a study panel that's looking at it to decide what is the state policy going to be and how do we put some laws in place to make this transition to using more driverless cars smooth.
I mean, one of my questions is, so say a driverless car causes an accident, who gets sued at that point? Do you sue the software company? Do you sue the car owner? Somebody is, in theory, liable for that accident. And that has to get figured out, I think.
Yeah, and there's some other issues that people have raised. I mean, hacking, are people going to take over the car? That's already a concern.
That does happen already.
Yeah, but if you have a car that drives itself, what about that? If you're reading a book and you're hacked and somebody takes over the car and crashes it. Another big one for Wisconsin is what about the weather? If, there's a foot of snow, do these cars... can they figure out how to drive in snow?
They know how to pump the brakes?
I'm sure they'd be better than people from Illinois driving.
That's not hard.
Also, what about a confusing situation, a weird one-way street, or a confusing sign?
I think people have said, what if somebody's wearing a shirt that looks like a road? Does the car notice that the shirt is sort of like the I think it's called the Roadrunner effect? You paint this, you paint the tunnel you paint the road onto the side of the mountain. Can the car realize that it's not just a painting of the road going on? It's actually the side of a mountain.
Yeah. What if Wile E. Coyote starts causing problems?
There's a lot of questions. I think people are generally concerned about this. They don't like the idea of losing control of their vehicle.
Yeah.
But the thing that's not discussed is how bad humans are at driving cars.
Yeah.
And how many accidents and people we kill because we're careless and we're not paying attention to the roads.
Yeah, and realistically, I think in Madison's case, the thought is that maybe, 5 or 10 years from now, there could be some shuttle buses on campus, maybe a shuttle bus that goes down Park Street or University Avenue and drives people, and you get in and you go, and it's efficient and quick.
You don't have to pay a bus driver $120,000 a year then.
And that's kind of been the concern. I mean, there's sort of this, on the left, this union concern about, what about lost jobs?
We're going to start automating jobs,
And that happens in every industry. I think that's going to happen gradually, and I'm not all that concerned about it. We don't have elevator operators anymore.
Are we concerned about automated journalism?
Well, we are, but it hasn't costed you or me our jobs yet.
Automated cartoons, I like that. Have robots draw editorial cartoons.
Yeah, but the reality is, hey, we're sitting here doing a podcast. Why, as journalists? Because of technology. We have to change with the times and do more with technology, and every industry has to do that. And jobs will be created too. Somebody has to keep track of these autonomous vehicles. Somebody has to build them. Somebody has to design the system.
And protect them from getting hacked.
Yeah, so that doesn't mean that there's not going to be jobs. It might just be some different kinds of jobs that replace the old kind of jobs. The other concern, which is more of a kind of a libertarian on the right concern, is, well, wait a minute, I'm in control, not the computer. Or especially, what if, you and I are not big car guys?
No, I'm not a big car guy.
As required by law in Madison, we both drive Subarus.
We do drive Subarus. Mine's green, yours is black.
Yes, and we have even a Prius. My wife has a Prius.
Oh, yeah.
You get extra points in Madison for that. Although I don't quite understand it, it still seems to me that should be the car for the fiscal conservative, because whenever I pull it in to fill up the tank, it's like $14.
You're not really loving America if you're only spending $14 on gas.
So you and I are not car guys, but I have to say I have a stick in my Subaru. I like driving a manual vehicle. I think it's fun.
Yeah. Makes you feel like a race car driver.
Yeah. But my mechanic tells me, I haven't fact-checked this, but he said the last he looked, 6% of the American fleet of cars had stick shifts in them.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get a manual transmission in a vehicle nowadays.
In fact, he told me you're probably not going to be able to buy one for long. So that kind of gets to that issue of, is driving being taken away from us slowly? I mean, maybe there is something to this idea if you believe, I always want to be able to drive a car, that eventually you're not going to be able to drive a car on the roads. You might be able to do it on a track or on your own property or over at some, company lot.
See, I always I enjoy driving a car until I don't want to do it anymore. And then it'd be kind of nice if a computer could just take over for a while. I mean, that 3-hour drive down to Chicago through traffic, it'd be nice to not be sitting in stop and go traffic all the way into Chicago on a regular basis.
The other news on this is that it sort of relates to our last podcast, Phil, about Foxconn, is that part of the plan for the Foxconn plant is that there would be a couple local roads with dedicated lanes for autonomous vehicles. And the idea is that Foxconn would have some shuttles for workers that would take them either around the plant or from the plant, maybe to some area where then they would be taken home. That's in the DOT plan.
I mean, that's kind of cool. And I think, especially situations where you're on sort of a closed campus like that, I think people, that inspires a lot less concern than autonomous vehicles on the road.
Yeah, and speaking of that concern, the latest poll that I could find on that was a Gallup poll. It was from February. 54% of respondents from across the country said that they were unlikely to utilize a self-driving car. A quarter of respondents, 25%, said they would likely use the car. Also, a majority of the respondents, 59%, said they were uncomfortable with the idea of traveling in a fully autonomous vehicle. 23% said they were comfortable with this. And then the biggest number, 62% of Americans, at least who responded to the Gallup survey, said that they feel uncomfortable about driving on the same road as autonomous trucks. And I don't get that. I would trust a computer not to run me over before I'd ever trust a human not to run me over.
Unless that computer was Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I'm sorry, but I can't do that. The politics on this are basically bipartisan. I don't think that there's a right-left.
I think some people on the right like it, and some people on the left like it, and some people on both sides of the aisle are worried about it for various reasons, whether it's taking away jobs or losing control or a safety hazard.
But our view as the State Journal, as half of the State Journal editorial board,
the better-looking half,
our view is that it's going to save untold numbers of lives and money, probably make public transportation a lot cheaper, and be good for society.
Because robots aren't as dumb as humans.
The other autonomous movie, this might be before your time, Herbie. Do you remember Herbie?
Oh, Herbie the
love bug.
The love bug, yeah.
Yeah.
They remade it with Lindsay Lohan back in the 90s.
Exactly. That's probably why you know about it.
I don't think I've ever seen either version of it, but yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, that was like one of the coolest movies. And you had the bug that could drive itself, and it was kind of a person. And it could do wheelies, and it wound up like beating a Lamborghini in a race.
That's pretty awesome.
Was
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang autonomous, or was it just awesome?
He was magical. I'm not sure if it was autonomous. I think it was. We'll have to call up Dick Van Dyke and check on that.
He's still around and awesome.